Yeah. So
No.
from here we can change.
I'm sorry for the delay. First of all, I was in a meeting of purchase department. It took a little extra time. So I'm going to discuss randomized controlled trials, or RCTs as we call them in short. These are the names. So we have Dr. Himani Deka.
So everybody can interact for a while, please. You can unmute yourself and you can interact if you
Or you can
we are
just do
audible.
a thumbs up.
Yeah. Dr.
Dr.
Devashish.
John and Dr. Ray, Devashish Ray, right?
Yes.
Okay. I have a feeling that you are not able to listen. Okay. I think there is some connectivity issue here.
I don't know. It's little, sir.
No, sir, it's fine, sir. We are able to listen you.
Okay, great. Great. And can you please share with me what are your departments, specialties?
Please switch on your video and kindly introduce yourself one by one.
Sir, I am associate professor in the Department of Anatomy.
Department of?
Kindly speak little loudly, please, ma'am. There is some disturbance. Yes, yes, ma'am. Can you speak a little loud, ma'am? You are not audible to us.
Yeah, I am from Department of Anatomy.
Okay.
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 And
Yes.
and I am PhD in genetics.
Okay, good. Dr. Devashish, Dr. John.
PGA Chandigarh. এমন কিছু লাভ হয় না তারপরও কনফিউজ
Yes, Dr. What is his name?
John.
Yes, Dr. John, can you introduce yourself?
Sir, I'm a pediatrician, sir. I'm working in DC hospital.
There is some. You're not, sorry, you're not audible here. Stop share, then we will share again. Chandamok, yes. Dr. Chandamok, can you introduce yourself?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I am from Agartala Government Medical College.
Okay.
Agartala.
And department?
Department of Community Medicine.
Okay.
I am working as a tutor.
Okay. Dr. John?
Unmute him. Unmute.
Can you move a little bit backwards, Dr. John?
Your face is not visible from.
Great.
Yes,
Now it's
yes,
good.
yeah, now it is good. I think there is some.
Yes, good. Yes. It looks like it's now good. Yes.
We are not able to hear your voice. Your video is perfect. It's no problem.
Dr. Devashish, yes.
Yes. Dr. Kamal is with us. Dr. Kamal, can you interact with us? Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Kamal. I am from Tezpur. I work in LGB Regional Institute of Mental Health. It's a mental health institute.
Dr. Himani,
Yes.
you can interact with us. Can you tell us the specialties of Dr. Devashish and Dr. John? What are their specialties department?
Check. Yeah. Dr. Devashish is
Okay.
Associate
got it.
Professor in Pharmacology, Agartala Government College.
And Dr. John is left. Dr. John is from which specialty?
He can chat with us.
Okay, let's start then.
We will share. We will share screen. Full screen.
So, randomized control trials, this is the topic that we'll be discussing today. It will be of interest to I think Dr. Chanda and Dr. Devashish. I'm not sure about the others. Anatomy, perhaps not, but genetics, definitely there is some interest in genetics. If you want to ask some question, a science question, a research question, for example, what works best in a particular group of patients, there are several ways to answer that question. As of now, the best form of evidence that's generated by whenever we try to ask this question is what we call a randomized controlled trial. And as you can see, there are three words in it. Trial in itself just means a research. Sometimes we use the term RCCT, two C's. The second C being for clinical, which simply means it's a study in human beings. When we say controlled, this means there is a control group basically. And randomized means, we'll discuss it a little later in detail. What do we mean by randomization? So the term that we use for RCTs or RCCTs is what's called an interventional study. So there is an intervention that we are going to do in a trial. In contrast to observational studies, like case control or cohort studies, where you simply observe. Here we do an active intervention in the sense that we put our patients into two groups or three groups, and to each group we give our research question intervention to one group, and to other we may give say a new drug versus an old drug, or versus what's called a placebo. We'll discuss these issues later. But first of all, one very good way to classify RCTs is if you think of in terms of regulatory trials and what I call non-regulatory trials. By the term regulatory, I mean is those trials, the data from which is submitted to some regulatory agency. Now, in the case of India, it's called DCGI, or Drug Controller General of India. For US, it's the FDA. You may have heard of it, FDA. That means mostly, these are those studies which are done for the purpose of gaining approval for marketing. So usually they are done by companies, and that's why I also call them sometimes SITs, or sponsor initiated trials. So sponsor is typically a pharma company. They approach us, the investigators, to do their studies for them, and they pay the institutions for that money. If it's a private practitioner, they pay the private practitioner to do that study. So there are huge studies. I'll discuss a little bit about them. the type of studies we people do are non-regulatory. We don't intend to submit our data to the regulatory authority for marketing. We are just trying to answer a research question, and I call them IITs, which means investigator-initiated trials. If you look at the new rules that have come, that came last year in March by the Government of India, they are called new drug rules, and they call these studies, IITs, as academic trials. So this means that typically studies done by us, people like you and people like us here, where no pharma company is involved, and we do the study simply. You have a clinical query, you need some question to be answered, and those questions can be answered in these studies. Now, pharma company trials, the SITs, don't typically answer a research question that is meaningful for us, that we need to answer. They answer only that question which allows them to get approval for marketing. Okay, so I hope this part is okay. So when I talk about regulatory trials, you know, what I mean is they are trials with new drugs. At that time, we don't even call them drugs, we call them chemicals. The name that we use is a new chemical entity, or NCE. So whenever, you know, for example, like anatomy people are here, they do some research, they look at some, you know, receptor in some disease, say Alzheimer's or some other Parkinsonism, and they find that, okay, there is some receptor which, you know, if it is stimulated or blocked, it can, you know, cause some positive beneficial effect in the patients. Whenever they publish this kind of data, the pharma companies are quick to pick up on that data and start developing their molecules around that particular target. Okay. So nowadays, that is being used nowadays is called in silico drug design, that is in computers. So they can model that receptor which the anatomy or physiology people discovered, and on that modeled receptor on a computer, they can see which chemicals fit into that receptor. And you know, after they have done some of these studies, then they will do some animal studies, in vitro studies, to check whether this, you know, target is good, the chemical that they have discovered works on that. After all that has been done, they will then do their study in healthy volunteers mostly. So that this will be the first time a new chemical has been tested in a human being. Prior to that, the only research that has been done is in animals. So here, what I am showing you is our facility where we do such studies. They are called clinical pharmacology units. They are they exist all over the world in some selected places. This is typically the job of clinical pharmacologists to do such kind of studies. So here, what we need to decide is, you know, what dose to be given to a healthy person. You know, they are healthy people. We are giving some outside foreign chemical about which nothing is known from humans. Only data that we have got is from animals. They are rather risky kind of studies. They are inherently dangerous because, you know, we don't know what can happen to a human being. So we have currently ongoing at least two trials that are ongoing, phase 1 trials, where we are testing some new chemicals in healthy volunteers. They are extremely interesting studies for clinical pharmacologists and even internal medicine people, because, you know, when we administer a drug to a healthy volunteer, we don't know what to expect. Anything can happen. So it's more or less an ICU kind of a setting. Volunteers are put on monitors or resuscitation facilities are there. So we start with a very low dose. That dose is based on animal data, and gradually keep increasing the dose. Go on increasing till the time we find that, you know, something starts to happen. Some either adverse drug reaction starts to appear, say nausea. Patients, healthy volunteers start complaining of nausea. Or when we do biochemistry, there is some LFT change that occurs. So let's say we started at, say, 0.5 mg next group 1 mg, then 2 mg, 4 mg, 8 mg. Let's say at around 12 mg something starts to happen. So now we know that 12 mg is the dose above which we will not go in our subsequent research. We have reached kind of the maximum dose. The term that we use for that is maximum tolerated dose, MTD. Okay. So once we get this MTD, now we have some idea that, okay, this is how the drug, this is the dose that will subsequently test in what are called phase 2 trials. Now in phase 2 trials, for the first time, we will be giving the drug to patients. Okay. So here what we do is we select some patients with the disease and give the drug to the patients to see whether it works or not. Here the sample sizes are small, up to around 50 to 200 usually. If the drug is found to be safe and found to work in these small group of patients, then we go to phase 3 trials. Phase 3 trials are very huge trials. Their budgets run into millions of dollars when pharma companies do it. And they are typically multicentric and multinational. They happen across many countries in the world. India is often takes part in these studies. PJ does a lot of phase 2, phase 3 studies. Trials.
Sorry to interrupt. There is a question from Dr. Devasisri. Academic clinical trial with approved drug, in which phase of trial it fits?
You see, I'll read the question for everyone. It's good if you keep asking questions in between. The question is, in case of academic trials, the non-regulatory trials, which phase do we call it? Like I said, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So the question is, what is that phase of trial in which we do investigator-initiated or academic trials? Now, this is a very sort of tricky question. A short answer would be call them phase 4. Okay, but I'd like to explain a little bit here. You see, these phases 1, 2, 3 or 4, they are not actually phases of clinical trials. They are phases of drug development. Phase 1 of new drug development, phase 2, phase 3. As such, a clinical trial does not have any phases. A clinical trial is a trial, like any study. So when we talk of academic trials, what we are doing, what typically we do in academic trials, let's say there is a drug. I'll give you an old example, say gabapentin, which is approved for, say, epilepsy. Now some academician wants to test in post-herpetic neuralgia, for example. Okay. Now this is an indication for which the drug has not been approved. It's been approved only for epilepsy. So when we do such kind of a trial, but because the drug is already in market, you can call it a phase 4. But since this is an academic trial and we will not be submitting our data to the regulatory authority we are not seeking any marketing permission, this phase word becomes irrelevant. On the other hand, because we will be doing initially a small pilot trial for this particular indication, say neuralgic pain, it becomes the phase 2 trial in terms of number of patients, and because it's the first time the drug is tested in patients. Here we will not need to do phase 1 in healthy volunteers because that data is already with us. You see, so you can give 3 answers to this question. One is that it is phase 2, if you ask about number of patients. You can call it phase 4, which is basically a post-marketing phase, and you can call it that I don't want to give any numbers to it because it's not part of the new drug development. This is a sort of a longish answer. If it's okay, then I'll go ahead. Dr. Devashish, it's okay? Okay. So what are the essential components of RCTs? Whenever, if you want to set up a clinical trial in your department or you want to do some trial, what should be there? Obviously, the first question is that you have some idea. I don't know how many EBM sessions you had. You may have an idea that, okay, maybe like nowadays the excellent example is coronavirus. And there is a lot of discussion around ACE inhibitors. Okay. So some people are saying ACE inhibitors will increase the coronavirus disease. Some people are saying they will be protective. Okay. So exact opposing of views are there. Let's say you are of the, you believe in the idea that ACE inhibitors are going to work well in coronavirus. You belong to that. So that is your idea. Now you want to convert it into a research question, which is in the format of a PICO format. You have gone through that PICO, right?
Yes, PICO form.
Patients, intervention, comparator, outcome, and time, right?
Yes.
So if we say this ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers, say losartan for coronavirus, your patients will become patients with coronavirus. Intervention will become losartan, for example. Comparator will become standard therapy because nothing is known, or placebo. And outcome will be, say, mortality or pneumonia complications or length of ICU stay, length of hospital stay. These will become outcomes. Of course, we'll discuss about these outcomes a little later, and time, how long you want to give. So now your idea that was there, a vague kind of an idea, gets converted into an actual research question. Once you have that actual research question, then you start thinking of what exactly study population should be. Now, when we say population, the first P part of the PICO or PICO format. So here we want to specify clearly. Let's say if you take the example of coronavirus, you want to take mild disease, moderate disease, severe disease patients. You want to include all patients. This should be one category of population. Let's say it's more, sort of known to be more dangerous in elderly populations. So you want to include elderly population or exclude elderly population, because including elderly population makes it more relevant, but also because elderly population is more vulnerable to complications, it also makes the study more risky, right? So this is the balance that you. Is there a question?
Yes, sir. Abhijit, you want to interact or please mute yourself, please. Okay.
Okay. So this is the selection of the study population, exact people you want to include, which one people you don't want to include. Like, it's many times what we exclude is patients with concomitant illnesses, say, patient with renal failure or deranged liver enzymes up to 5 times the upper limit of normal, patients with psychiatric illnesses who may not be able to take the disease. So this inclusion exclusion criteria list you should prepare once you start planning your study. The next thing is that now you will take out, you have this whole population of patients with the disease which you are targeting, and out of that population you select those patients which are your study population. So you give them a new drug versus, for example, placebo. You have planned a placebo controlled trial. O or O stands for new drug and P for placebo. How do you decide which patient gets new drug, which patient gets placebo? This is decided by R, or randomization, which simply means it is decided by chance. Okay. So when we do our trials, when a patient comes to us, we take out a coin, do a toss, heads for drug, tails for placebo, and we decide based on that. Okay. It would be very interesting if you did it. Patients will be, very surprised that doctor is tossing a coin and deciding on which treatment to give. But this is an ideal, a good method of randomization, because a coin toss is very random. But nowadays we use computers, because once we tried, the patients were not very happy with that. tossing of coin. We were tossing the coin in front of them. But nowadays we do it in with the help of computers. So what we do is, for example, if we have a trial in which we want to include 100 patients, so before we start the trial, we'll make a list of 100 patients, and for each 100 patients, we'll randomize which patient will get what. Okay. Then we prepare these bottles, which you can see. These bottles will be numbered sequentially. This is patient, for example, patient number 12. This is patient number 13. And what is inside, it could be drug, it could be placebo, matching placebo. And these bottles are prepared beforehand and they are ready. So when patient number 12 comes, we look at the bottle, which bottle contains patient number 12. We give that bottle to the patient. So typically the junior resident or the senior resident who is doing the trial doesn't know what's inside. If I am the one who is the chief guide or investigator, I will know. When we do company-sponsored trials, in that case, we also don't know. It's basically the company sends us the drug. Okay.
There's another question from Dr. Davis.
There is one more question for us, which is when you do a trial in hospital, where we don't know what is the sampling frame, whether we can do simple randomization. Yes, we can do simple randomization. It depends on what exactly question you are going to answer. For example, if there is a trial which you are doing in, say, hypertension, right? And you think that, there are data, according to scientific data and research published, that diabetics have worse outcomes in hypertensives. And you do not want, because, when we do simple randomization, when sometimes there can be some mismatch. One group may have slightly larger number of patients than the other group. It can happen when we do simple randomization that in one group, there may be more diabetics, whereas in the other group, there are less diabetics. And when we start to compare results, these diabetics are going to cause some problems, that our data will be sort of, not very pure. So in that case, because the research question demands, we can stratify our randomization, that is called stratified randomization. And what we will do is, stratification means that we will have equal number of diabetics in both the arms and non-diabetics in both the arms. So hypertensive patients with diabetics will stratify, okay, so that there is no number mismatch. Approximately equal number of cases are there. This is a very good strategy if when we implement it, but there needs to be a justification for doing that. Because if we make too many subgroups like this, too many strata, let's say we decide to stratify based on age categories, gender categories, socioeconomic status, disease severity, and so on, then once we start doing the comparisons, it becomes a little tricky, as I'll see what can happen with multiple comparisons. We will discuss it briefly. So now we have prepared our 100 bottles. We have a list of randomization. Now that list is kept closed. It is not open. Only the bottles are outside, and they are dispensed to the patients who come as they come. Bottle number 1 goes to patient number 1. Bottle number 2 to patient number 2. Now this order of bottles should never be changed, okay? Because when we randomize this in our RCTs, randomization is the most important feature. In no situation should we try to tamper with or alter the randomization sequence, okay? So once we have randomized, the question often comes to us is, how do we blind? How we do blinding in academic trials? For company-sponsored trials, it's not difficult because the company sends you the drug. So they make the matching placebo, it's okay. When we do our trials, it's a little difficult. We have to request our friends or students who work in pharma companies to arrange for us a matching placebo. And usually they will give us, and we are able to do exact placebo controlled trials, and that way we are able to achieve a good amount of blinding. Now, blinding is important, especially in cases where our outcomes are, subjective or, more of patient-related outcomes. If the outcome is death, blinding doesn't make much a difference. But in academic trials, death is rarely an outcome. If you are looking at adverse drug reactions, again, if the trial is not blinded, you can have some, biases, misconceptions that, okay, the patient is saying he is having persistent headache after the drug, he is on placebo, so it doesn't matter. He was on drugs, so, those kinds of situations can be avoided if we do blinding. But blinding has to be proper. The drug and the capsule has to, the drug and the placebo have to totally match in color, in taste, in size, in expiry date. Even if you break the tablet, it should look the same. Both the tablets should look the same, old as well as the placebo. Placebo and the drug. So this one thing is important to remember. Sometimes what happens is blinding is not possible. The company refuses to give you a placebo, or one is a tablet and one is an injection. It's very difficult to compare the two. Or we do not have resources to get a matching placebo prepared. So for that, for most practical purposes, this is a very good design. It is called probe design. Full form is prospective, randomized, open with blinded endpoint assessment. So what it means is that the trial is open. That means it's not blinded. It is randomized. But the person who is going to look at the results, what happened to the patient, that person, that resident, JR, senior resident or a faculty member, that person does not know the patient received what. Okay. So the question is, how do you do it? What is practically, how do you do it? So how we do it is, as I said, when we make a list of 100 patients, for example, we make a list, patient number 1 gets drug, 2 gets placebo, 3 gets placebo, 4 gets drug, and so on, random number list. So for each patient, we make an envelope like this. In that envelope, we'll write it, on the envelope, it will be patient number 1, 2, 3, 4. Within the envelope, there will be, it is drug or placebo. Okay. So what we do is, for example, when I give it to my resident, or say, we do a lot of trials in cardiology, and when cardiology resident will come to me, I'll make these envelopes for him, and I'll tell them that, okay, now, for example, once you have decided that this person is fit for enrollment, that all inclusion exclusion criteria have been checked, they are fine, all investigations done, patient fits within the disease category which you want. Now you open the envelope, look what's inside. If it is drug, give drug. If it's placebo, give placebo. Okay. So when next patient comes, you do the same thing. Okay. So this is one part of the thing which is, we are doing randomization, but it is open label, but it's open label at the last moment, just before patient gets into the trial. Okay. Now the patient will be prescribed the drug. Now, if you want to know what's the scientific term for this process, it's called allocation concealment. Okay. So we have concealed allocation to which group the patient will go. Okay. This is how you implement allocation concealment. And for assessment of the endpoint, for example, what happened to the patient, then we will need another person who will not know what this patient got. Okay. Now, if you are doing a trial in which blinding is not possible, and if you do it like the way I have described, and when you write a paper out of it, you describe exactly as I have said, the chances of getting published become very good. Okay. Doing very simple trials, using these, mentioning these strategies, we have been able to publish in very, very good journals like American Heart Journal or JAMA Dermatology, for example, because we described these techniques properly and we did them properly. this methodology section, this probe design, or if you are able to blind properly, double blind, these are excellent strategies for getting published. Now we come to the outcome. You have a sample, you randomize into two groups. Now you have to look at the outcome. Now, when we talk of outcomes, there are two words that we use, outcome as well as endpoint. For this purpose, today's purpose, I'll say they are more or less synonymous, outcome and endpoint. So we'll go to that. So how do you record your data? You record your data in what is called a case record form or a case report form. So in pharma company trials, this case report form is electronic nowadays, computer based. We just enter the data into the computer. In our studies, in academic trials, we use still paper based case record forms. The term used is CRF, case report form or case record form. So for all your trials that you prepare, you will have to make a CRF. Now this CRF should have all the entries that you need for your trial, patient demographic characteristics. Let's say you are monitoring lipid profile. So lipid profile and each time point you want to measure 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. These should be captured. Okay. Now I come to the endpoints or outcomes. What we are looking at. For example, in the coronavirus example, I said endpoint could be mortality. It could, in some other setting, outcomes can be, length of ICU stay or length of hospital stay, number of rescue medications consumed, which which can be an endpoint. But primary endpoint is the most important endpoint. Okay, this should be an endpoint which is really clinically meaningful for the question you are trying to answer. Okay, this is the endpoint based on which you will decide your sample size, how much sample size is there. So be very careful in selecting this sample size. For example, in a clinical trial, if you want to do in say diabetics or in hypertensive, if I say mortality is a very good endpoint because it's objective and but this is going to take such a long time that it is useless. I mean, it's very difficult to conduct a trial. A trial will be very long. For secondary, so primary endpoint, you select that, okay, this is the most, for example, if you are studying sepsis, in case of sepsis, primary endpoint has to be mortality. There you can't, think of any other thing. But if there are some other features that are also important, then we call them secondary endpoints. And secondary endpoints are those which are less important, but also have some value. As I said, length of ICU stay, duration of use of ventilator, length of hospital stay. These things are also important. So these should be captured as secondary endpoints. This is a very good cartoon, if you can see it well. This is a drug which is used as anti-allergic medication, and the company person is telling to the clinicians that the drug is very good because it reduces the incidence of dental caries. Now, when he was asked why it reduces the incidence of caries, he said because placebo group was sugar tablets, so there was more caries in the placebo group, so they are projecting as reduced dental caries. So whenever the pharma company person comes to you and starts talking about, this secondary endpoint is statistically significant, this one is significant, just ask him what is the primary endpoint. Is primary endpoint significant? And if primary is not significant, you can basically reject that paper, reject that trial. So don't think that, that means that drug is not useful. If anything, you have some, hypothesis generating kind of an idea that, okay, maybe in future you can test in detail what's happening. But for this time point, the drug wasn't effective, trial failed. If primary endpoint is not significant, okay. So once you have completed your trial, you have to draw your inference. You got your results, and when we talk of inference, there are two things in which we discuss here in inference. The first thing is whether your trial results are applicable for the whole population of patients. Are they generalizable? Okay. The scientific term that we use is called external validity. So does your trial have good external validity? Now, as you can imagine, this external validity will depend upon what were your inclusion-exclusion criteria. If you excluded patients with, say, severe disease, or patients more than 75 years of age, or children, say, less than 12, now your trial results are not applicable to these populations. Okay. So this is one point you have to keep in mind. The typical patient who sits in your OPD in front of you and you think he is suitable candidate for this drug because he has many of the features. But if you compare with the inclusion-exclusion criteria, he may not be suitable because he does not fit. It doesn't mean drug won't work in him, but it means that you need to be cautious in interpretation. The other type of so this is external validity. Internal validity is all those things that I described. How well did you do your trial? How was the randomization? How was the blinding? How was allocation concealment? So these things are internal versus external validity. Now coming to statistics. Now in statistics, you need two things basically. One thing is sample size calculation. I don't know if you have some sessions on sample size calculation or if you can do some training program on this. We do some training program on sample size calculation. It's a topic altogether. So even when you are doing an academic trial, best thing is to do the sample size calculation and tell how many patients you will include. The second point that you need to mention is for each endpoint, which statistical test will be used. Now, this is one typical problem that we get in PGI when trials come to us or studies come to us in ethics committee for approval. Many investigators write appropriate statistical test will be used. I'm sure it will be happening in your institutions also. Now, this is incorrect. We can never write appropriate statistical test will be used. We have to describe which test will be used. So please remember these 2 points about statistics. Sample size calculation is very important. Although if you remember the James Lind trial of scurvy, it had only 2 patients per group. But at least, and it was statistically not significant because the sample size was small. But nevertheless, it gave us the treatment of scurvy. So sample size calculation, please do it before you do your trial. The next point about statistical analysis is that subgroup analysis, as I said, the question you were asking, can we stratify patients of...
Another question from Dr. Dev. Whether...
Okay, I will come to that. So subgroup analysis is one area which is important. As I said, if you do too many subgroup analysis, right, then the chances that something comes statistically significant just by chance also increase. It's simple probability in statistics. Okay, if we keep probability at 5%, 0.05, if we do 100 comparisons, 5 will be significant just by chance. It's simple maths, nothing much in it. So there is a very interesting example of aspirin trial which was done in nurses, and it was a large trial. It showed efficacy of aspirin in preventing cardiovascular events, and the authors submitted their paper to Lancet. The Lancet editors said, your data is so good, why don't you do subgroup analysis, based on age, based on duration of aspirin use, based on so many factors. The authors did one subgroup analysis, which was very interesting. They said we'll do an analysis based on astrological sign, and they found that nurses who had sun sign of Libra or Gemini, the results were not significant. For others, they were significant. They did many subgroup analysis and one significant they presented. Okay, so to convince the editors that we should not be doing subgroup analysis, too many subgroup analysis. Okay, the question that has come to us is that should dropouts be included in the analysis? Some patients will drop out of the study. Some patients, investigator will withdraw because some adverse drug reaction occurred, patient wasn't improving. Now, here also,
Dropout cases.
this one. So dropout cases. So here again, there is a short answer and there is a slightly longer answer. So short answer is yes. All dropouts should be, everyone should be included. Okay. So anyone who got randomized in the beginning should be included in the analysis. Okay. This type of analysis, there is a name given to this type of analysis. It is called intention to treat analysis, ITT, intention to treat. This means everyone who got randomized should be included. Some people, some scientists change it a little bit to say only those patients who got at least one dose of the drug should be included. Patient who did not get any drug should be excluded. Okay. So intention to treat analysis is randomized, include in the trial. But as you can yourself see, this can be problematic. So there is another kind of analysis that is possible. It's called per protocol analysis, PP analysis, per protocol. In per protocol analysis, we include patients who took, say, 80% of the medication. Okay. So here we put some cutoff that the patient should have been compliant at least 80% of the time, or 80% follow-up should have been completed. Only then it will be included. But as you can see, per protocol analysis will mean you will exclude a lot of dropouts. Okay, so your sample size will decrease because these dropouts are not occurring at random. Patients may be dropping out because of adverse drug reactions. Okay, you are compromising your randomization. Okay, so both these types of analysis have their problems. I prefer ITT, intention to treat. If a patient is randomized, you include. But there are two versions of analysis. Okay, is that fine?
There is another question. Can you take?
The question here, what is the difference between blinding and masking? So you know what happened was earlier most of the trials, when clinical trial business started, all these things started. Trials were occurring in infectious diseases, typically tuberculosis. Then came cardiovascular disorders, diabetics. Okay, so these were the main areas. So we used to call it double-blind trial, single-blind trial. Then a lot of trials started to happen in ophthalmology. Now when we started to write protocols in ophthalmology, then people were very, ophthalmologists were not very happy in using the term blind. They said we'll use the term mask. So then the word double mask trial, single mask trial became in use. So they are basically synonymous. Sometimes you will do an interim analysis, that is your trial is ongoing, but say you plan to enroll 500 patients. At the end of 250 patients, you do an analysis, and there is, for this purpose, we constitute what's called a DSMB, Data and Safety Monitoring Board, DSMB. Now the DSMB looks at the data in between the trial and it recommends whether trial should be continued or it should be stopped. Okay. So this is done typically in those trials which have more chances of mortality and serious adverse reactions. Okay. A few words on ethical issues. you know, they are again a separate topic. I told you one problem that we face in our ethics committee: people not writing properly their studies about their studies. Many of us don't write ethical justification in our projects. Why that study is ethically justified, or if we write an ethical justification, it's sort of very standard. Informed consent will be taken, ethics committee approval will be taken. Uh, this makes ethical justification. This is not ethical justification. Ethical justification, if you have to write, you have to mention what harms patient can have, what benefits patient can get, and do a risk benefit kind of analysis and show how your trial is justified. Okay. Simply saying informed consent, IEC approval is not ethical justification. Okay. So once you have thought of these things, you have written those things, you write to it. All of this constitutes what's called a protocol, a trial protocol. Now I'm showing you a trial protocol of a pharma company study. This is single project that came to us in the ethics committee. One project, 6 or 12 binders. So this is just one trial. So in our academic trials, typically they are not that large; they are smaller. And you may have seen or guided your students or thesis protocols. So protocol is that document which should tell everything about the trial: the introduction, background, why you are doing, how you are going to do, what you are going to do, all the details. Okay, it is that document that goes to the ethics committee, that goes to the funding agency. If there is a scientific committee, it goes to that committee. So this is the most important document of the trial. It should include the CRF, as I said. It should include the consent form, patient information sheet. Everything should be here in the protocol. The one thing that you shouldn't be forgetting is register your trial in the clinical trial registry. It's required as per law, and you have to register your trial after ethics committee approval, but before enrolling the first patient. Okay. You cannot start your trial unless you get a CTRI number that they will give. Once you register with them, you upload your trial data, your trial protocol, what are some things that they want, and then they will give you a CTRI number. So that number you need before you start. Okay. A few words on consort. Now, consort is simply a document that was given by editors of various journals. The purpose of this was that once we have conducted the trial, so when we report it, there should be some uniformity. So they gave us a set of guidelines when we want to report trials. So consort simply means consolidated standards of reporting trials. It's just about reporting of the trial. What should be the elements? So they give everything: title, abstract, introduction, trial design, what are things that we have discussed, they should be added. So there is a checklist: randomization, sequence generation, allocation, concealment, so on, blinding, statistics, then results, discussion, everything should be there. And one important thing is that when you are going to write your trial, please include this diagram, this consort chart or consort diagram. This is important in the sense that here what you are doing is you are first writing how many patients you assessed for eligibility. Like for example, in your OPD, 100 patients came with that disease, but all 100 patients were not suitable. Some were excluded. So you write how many you assessed. Sometimes we use the word screened. How many you excluded, the reasons for exclusion, how many you randomized to intervention 1, intervention 2, for example, drug versus placebo, how many did not receive, how many were lost to follow, Dr. Devasish, your question, dropouts and all that, and how many you analyzed. Okay, so here, if you randomized 100, you have to say analyzed 100. This is one part, intention to treat analysis. Okay. So a few words on this. This is the issues that I discussed are mentioned in this manual that we wrote a few years ago. if you are interested, it's not that expensive. 2 cups of coffee, and it is written in a way that people found interesting, funny language, and jokes, interesting examples. So if you have any other questions on this, so if you have some questions, we'll take them up. 3 questions. So first question is, what is the difference between exploratory trial, superiority trial, okay, non-inferiority trial? Second question is, does academic trial need CTRI registration? Simple answer is yes, academic trials also need CTRI. Third question is, does academic trials need to be registered CTRI? Yes, DCGI no. You do not need DCGI approval for academic trials. Only thing is, the data from this trial cannot be used by a company for marketing purpose. Okay? But you can do the trial. You don't need anything for this. Then one more question is, what is post hoc analysis? Okay. So now I'll start with the first one. What is the meaning of exploratory trial? Okay. Now, if you remember, I discussed about phase 1 and phase 2 trials. Now, when we do not know much about the new drug, we are giving to maybe healthy volunteers or a few patients, we are just trying to find out whether the drug works, this causes some improvement, and does not cause some serious common adverse reactions, it becomes an exploratory trial. But once we got this information, then what we need to do is do what is called a confirmatory trial. A confirmatory trial, typically we say phase 3 is a confirmatory trial. There you use thousands of patients. Results from that trial are said to be confirmatory. Now, if for example, if you talk of US FDA, the US FDA says that the company should submit 2 confirmatory trial results before it will get approval. Okay, so they need two trials, phase 3 trials, which are confirmatory large trials, which should be approved. The second question was, what is superiority trial? Okay, now superiority trial is when you want to show that your drug, whatever drug you are using or whatever your research, whatever you got your idea about the drug, or say surgical procedure or some physiotherapy or psychotherapy, whatever intervention you planned is superior to the older drug, for example. Okay, but when you say superiority trials and we start comparing, for example, new drug versus old drug, the difference will be very small when you get a difference between these two. So if you want to show a small difference between 2 groups, you need very huge sample size. Okay, but when you compare your new drug with a placebo, inactive, nothing, then the difference between the 2 will be large, right? So you need a smaller sample size. So when we say superiority trials, they are most of the times trials with when a drug is compared with placebo. Okay, I haven't seen trials which are new drug versus old drug compared and shown superiority. Most of the times, new drugs will be more or less equal to the old drug, somewhat better. Very few examples when this happens. So if you ask me simply what is a superiority trial, I will say it's a placebo trial. You showed your drug is active against placebo. Now, if you want to go read about this, there is a paper that just came out in Postgraduate Medical Journal about superiority trials. I will give them a link, or if you just Google Postgraduate Medical Journal, that is PMJ. It's a BMJ group, British Medical Journal group, PMJ, and my name, Sameer Malhotra, you will get this paper. There we discussing details about superiority trials, and you will find some very interesting concept in there, theoretical concept. I'm sure you will find it. It will generate some thoughts. Then the question is, what is an equivalence trial? Now, equivalence trials are those where we show that our new drug is equivalent to the old drug. By equivalent, we don't mean that it is equal. Okay, it's not same as equal. It is equivalent. So when we say equivalent, what we mean is that if this is the effect of old drug, the new drug will lies in between some boundaries. Okay, it can be slightly superior, upper boundary, it can be slightly inferior. So if it lies between these boundaries, it is an equivalence trial. Then this is non-inferiority. If we say non-inferiority, we say that this is new drug, this is old drug result, and my new drug will be non-inferior. This means it will lie within this boundary of non-inferiority. It is called non-inferiority margin. So if it goes below it, then my drug is inferior. But if it is between these two, new drug, old drug versus boundary, within boundary, then it is non-inferior. Now you read that paper, you will find interesting, comparison of these trials. How we look at these equivalence, superiority, non-inferiority trials. Then the question is, okay.
1 second. So anyone have question can unmute themselves. And
what is post hoc analysis? Then question is post hoc analysis. Okay. So post hoc analysis is, for example, you got your results. In the protocol, you have mentioned that we'll compare, say, HbA1c, blood sugar, random blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, postprandial blood sugar. These comparison we'll make. Okay. And when you got your results, you found that your new drug is not better than placebo. It's giving more or less same results. But when you have statistical software, you can, at the click of a mouse, you can do so many comparisons. You say that, okay, let's do a comparison let's exclude the elderly patients and do comparison. And when you do that, you find that now your drug is coming better than placebo. Now you did not plan this analysis. You looked at the data and you did it. Okay. And this is called post hoc analysis. Many people do it. It's to be strongly criticized. Companies also do it. That is why, CTRI and clinical trial registries came up so that people can compare that what you wrote in your protocol, what comparisons you will do. Did you do them or did you do some extra? Okay. So this is post hoc analysis. Per protocol analysis, I'll repeat. So, one type of analysis is you randomize your patients into two groups. All patients that were randomized, you include in the analysis. Dropouts, withdrawals, patient did not come, you include in the analysis. Okay. Per protocol analysis is you do not include all the patients, you include only those patients who were there with you, say 75% of the time or 80% of the time. This you predefine. Okay. It should be mentioned in the protocol, in the document that you prepared, that okay, per protocol analysis will be done. And by per protocol, we mean only patients who took 80% of the drug will be included. Okay. So this is per protocol analysis. Is it possible to analyze confounders? Wow, very good. Confounders in trials. Now, of course, it is possible to analyze confounding variables. The statistical technique that you will need to use is called ANCOVA, analysis of covariance. And you can, if you know a little bit of SPSS, it's very easy to do. There is a column in which whatever confounders you think are important, you include in that. So it is possible to do. Next question is, what is the difference between RCT and pragmatic clinical trial? Okay, good. So RCT and pragmatic trial, RCT is anything that we discussed. Okay. So you have done randomization, you have two groups of it can be an RCT. It may not be an RCT. Most of the time, even pragmatic trials are RCTs. Here by the word pragmatic we use is to say that here the trial is in settings which are close to clinical practice. Okay, when we say an RCT, we are saying very rigorous inclusion exclusion criteria, rigorous follow up. Patient comes to us, we note down a lot of details, CRF is filled, and this protocol, we ensure that protocol is followed. Patient does not take any concomitant medications, and these are extremely stringent conditions that we do RCTs. But as I said earlier also, these stringent conditions, these inclusion exclusion criteria, they reduce the generalizability of the trial, the external validity. A pragmatic trial is when we do not have so many inclusion exclusion criteria. We decide we'll enroll everyone. We do not have strict follow-ups. We may just have a telephonic follow-up. We just call the patient and find out, are you alive? That's all. Patient is alive, finished. We note down, right? So even this type of trials are called pragmatic trials. Here the sample sizes are huge. I have seen published papers of pragmatic trials, numbers 50,000, more than 50,000 patients in a trial, in one trial. So they are huge trials, minimum infrastructure required, minimum manpower required, but very close to the real practice. Okay. Any other
question?
Okay then.
Okay.
Good. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying so long.
So we have a feedback form. I'm sharing the link of the feedback form in the chat box. So kindly fill your feedback form. So thank you everyone for
Thank you.
I'll just give you the link of the paper.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumit. It was a great experience listening to you. Every time something new we learn. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. So I'm sharing the link with them. They can.
Okay, sir.
Or maybe I can show that to you. Can you see this?
No.
No. We'll bring it closer to this camera.
Yes. Then we'll take it.
It can't be now systematic. It can't be seen. If you can type it,
Okay.
Praveen, if you can type the link somewhere,
Yes.
that'll be good. Yeah.
Yes, sir. What is the title?
Type. Okay. Then we got this meta-analysis.
Okay. Maybe try.
हमारी स्पीड तो बड़ी स्लो है।
By the time you can fill the feedback form.
So just Google these, you will get. It just came last week only. नहीं एनीजियम के आर्टिकल उसके ऊपर पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट मेडिकल जर्नल पीएमजी. Okay then, see you again sometime.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.